Look, you know, there's no shortage of funny Canadians south of the border. In fact, Canadians have been killing it for years.
You really love me!
And the one who cleared the way for all of them is David Steinberg. He proved you could come from Canada, Winnipeg in David's case, and become a successful comedian.
Look out for that polar bear!
The second city in Chicago, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he was second only to Bob Hope in total number of appearances. And on stage, where along with Richard, or as they call him, Richie Pryor, and George Carlin, David helped transform stand-up in the 60s, making the shift from one-liners...
They said that marriage wouldn't last a year. Why can't I have a year like that?
...to personal stories and cutting social satire. But what's funny to some is downright blasphemy to others. You know, David's sermons on the Smothers Brothers helped get the show pulled off the air, and David himself...
President Nixon has a face that looks like a foot.
...was landed on Richard Nixon's enemies list. Behind the camera, he's directed Newhart, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Seinfeld. Oh, by the way, it was Jerry Seinfeld who coined the title of the new documentary about David's legacy that premiered at the Hot Dogs Festival in Toronto. It's a film called Quality Balls.
You had quality balls. You really did.
Please welcome David Steinberg!
Hey, George. So great to see you.
How are you? Good to see you. Thank you.
An honor, my friend.
Thank you.
How are things?
Pretty good.
Dude, going through your career is kind of overwhelming if you think about it. And I don't say it to embarrass you, but it's just the volume
Yes.
of work and jokes and appearances and impact.
Yes.
But that's from the outside. From the inside?
You know, I'm sort of like a nymphomaniac. I never said no.
Right, yeah.
To anything.
But does that mean that you were like a nymphomaniac, compelled to say yes?
No. I'm amazed when I look back at all the things that I did. But what you don't see there is how many failures I had to every success, because that was the difference. I failed at so many things in between that.
So you failed while the career was hot? The failing still happened in the middle?
Oh, if you're doing comedy and you're not failing, you're just not doing it right.
But that's a reason I think a lot of comics, and I understand it, will go for material that they think's a little bit easier because they can get that kind of instant validation. But as you saw in the clip we just played from the doc,
yes.
To have Jerry Seinfeld say, "You have quality balls."
Yes, that
You
was...
have not taken the easy path.
I did not. No. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's I am from Winnipeg, and we're an ornery group. You have to be ornery in Winnipeg, and I never thought about the widest possible audience. That was never what I didn't think I was going to get everybody, but I knew there were people like me out there, and I just wanted to connect with them. And as a result, I was on the President's Enemies list, threw the Smothers Brothers off the air.
Here's the Smothers Brothers moment. What, we got this here?
The Old Testament scholars say that Jonah was in fact swallowed by a whale. The Gentiles, the New Testament scholars, they say, hold it, Jews. No. Jonah, they literally grabbed the Jews by the Old Testament.
So now, what we don't see there is your hand moved?
Yes. See that? It's this gesture. This Old Testament, this gesture was on the front page of the New York Times the next day, because the Smothers Brothers, surprisingly, I know people watching this now, they were thrown off. That show never made it on the air.
Right.
They were the #1 show in the country. There were 3 networks. Can you imagine how much money they were worth to the network?
Right.
You do anything with religion and comedy, you're always going to be in some kind of trouble.
What's interesting about that is if you had done that joke today, nobody would get thrown off the air.
No.
You would just get bullied on Twitter.
Exactly. Well, you know what? It's interesting what you can get away with. Last year on NPR, they reviewed a show that they were now selling on DVD. And it was me and Mel Brooks and George Siegel, and it was called Jewish Sons. This is just like last year. And they showed a clip of mine, and it caused a controversy as if it were in 1973.
What is that all about, man?
Well, the clip was, it was all, you know, a talk show like this. It's improvised. And Susskind said to me, you know, my family's traditionally Jewish. He said, how do you bring an Italian girl home to your family? And I said, very easy. You bring a black girl home first.
That's the best joke. Okay, so I saw that joke and laughed. I almost spit up my nachos. I thought that's an exceptional joke.
That got me into trouble a month ago.
That's unbelievable.
They were still, and basically, I was talking about my dad's prejudice, not mine alone. So if you examine what it is, it's not really racist in any way. But yeah, you don't know what you're going to get, but if you're just being as honest, you have to find the most honest version of yourself and present it, or you don't stand a chance.
You were born right after the end of the war.
Yep.
Sent to Chicago.
Yep.
Like, that's a hard, scrabbled, interesting time.
Yes.
To come of age as a guy.
Yes. Yes. And you know, again, I always had my Canadian roots because when I was in Chicago, I was still coming home for all the Jewish holidays, which is almost every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
so
it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
I almost converted for the time off. I just didn't want to go through the snip thing, and that's all, you know.
Yeah, that was a good choice in every way. The snip thing I wasn't happy about it either. I just had no say.
Right, fair enough.
But yeah, it was a different time. It's very hard to identify that period of time with this period of time. You couldn't get things said. There was censorship on television. There's censorship everywhere. There was a blacklist. You were a communist if you. They called me a commie. I was so apolitical, it was unbelievable. But just because I went up against Nixon and because the Smothers did this religious thing, they made it tough.
But I mean, you were apolitical to a point, and then suddenly you were in that group of guys, you know, you, Carlin, who weren't apolitical, because the moment you're counterculture, you're political.
Yes, that's true. We were counterculture, but the counterculture was small. It was just starting. And the trick was to get something said on television, because almost everything that you did, a censor had to vet in some way. So you had to get things said that the censor might miss, that your audience might get, and that was the trick.
Oh, subversion is so much fun, isn't it?
It is.
Did you guys, like, were you Stones and Beatles, where you would call each other to try to figure out how nasty you can be on TV?
Well, it wasn't to be nasty. It was to get a point of view
That's
across.
what I mean. Like, how do you sneak it in?
Yeah, you just have to be inventive.
But over time, when your career is about getting laughs, you're training your subconscious to require validation at a high level.
That's true.
What's that like?
Well, it's sort of a great way to go through life. You are looking for the humor in everything. There is no tragic event that doesn't have some lightness to it eventually, not always at that moment.
What's the comedic math? What's the algorithm for too soon?
Well, you know, too soon is how good a comedian you are. If you do it too soon, you're not good enough.
Right.
Your job is to not do it too soon. And I did a lot of stuff too soon. I did a lot, really, those Tonight shows I did were too soon, but not for Carson.
Stick around, more with David Steinberg after this.
All right, coming up, he's worked with so many of the greats, but the one David really had to do battle with, one of the Golden Girls. We'll find out who next.
Where did you go to university? Because you deserted your native Winnipeg.
Oh, you know, I had a feeling you were going to take that approach.
Of course.
Do you see me as a deserter? Do you see me as someone who's gone to America to live by a pool and lie in the sun and not think of Canada in any terms other than derogatory?
Partially.
I didn't desert Winnipeg. I escaped it.
90 Minutes Live, Steinberg's on there with Peter Zowski. But there is that man, I mean, that position was taken by many people at some point, right?
when you leave Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a very proud Canadian. I've always said I was Canadian, and I mean, Carson used to say to me at commercial break, hey, "You're a Canuck, and you're putting down the president." I'm just going to tell them that you're not even a citizen of this country. Yeah, I mean, I never found a problem with. I never had a problem with that.
So Seinfeld, Curb, Golden Girls. And you've worked with some of the really
Mad About You.
Helen Hunt was
Helen Hunt.
Funny women,
Yes.
like so funny.
So funny. Designing women too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Golden Girls they're amazing. On Golden Girls, it was Betty White, and I just interviewed Betty White for Inside Comedy, and she reminded me of a story, and it was that B. Arthur, as you would imagine, was not the easiest person to direct, and Golden Girls was the first show that I directed. So you're scared when you're directing a show for the first time. And
Maude was a big show, so like she's a star.
Yeah, she's a star. So I gave her my first note. It was a simple note. I'm not a very loud, kind of noisy director. And I said, B, instead of saying the line standing, why don't you just sit down on the sofa and say the line that way? And she said, why in God's name would I do that? I said, you know, no need to bring the deity into this, you know, it's just a simple no. Okay, she did, believe me, she didn't do anything I asked. At the end of the week, and this is what Betty reminded me of, she sat down with the director, she would have a gin and tonic, and she would mull over what the week was. And she said to me, she had the gin and tonic around, she said, David, why is it that people take such an instant dislike to me? And I said, it just saves time.
How'd that go over?
That was a good note.
Yeah, that was a good note. Yeah. What's the first thing you remember that made you laugh?
Wayne and Schuster on the radio, killer comedians. And I just remember, I had the good fortune of growing up with radio, which means you're creating pictures in your head all the time. There was no hockey game better than the one you saw in your mind with Foster Hewitt and Wayne and Schuster.
What a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
David Steinberg, everybody. Inside Comedy, watch for it. There's a documentary called Quality Balls. It's on HBO Canada this month. We'll be right back.